Thank you, Dr. Carr, for analyzing this case. The patient presented with caries approaching the pulp. The diagnosis was necrotic pulp with symptomatic apical periodontitis. We initiated endodontic treatment at the end of July 2023 and visualized a crack entering the distal canal. We paused and had a discussion with the patient about the options, and he chose to pursue an extraction. We irrigated the tooth with the original Gentle Wave molar handpiece, and I left the canals empty and placed cavit coronally. Composite was bonded coronal to the cavit. The treatment page mistakenly lists the use of calcium hydroxide. I did not use any calcium hydroxide. I instructed the patient to have the tooth extracted as soon as possible, and I coordinated with the referring dentist implant surgeon. Unfortunately, the patient canceled the extraction appointment. The tooth was eventually extracted in February of 2024, at which point I sent the tooth to Dr. Carr.
I received the tooth intact in formalin and took pictures of it. This is the occlusal view. It looks like it had a very well placed composite resin. That's the business end of the root. There didn't appear to be any granulomas around the end of the root. These are our radiographs from both mesial and distal directions. Looked like there were 3 canals. So the first thing I did was I sectioned the crown off right below the attachment, and it appeared there were some pulpal tissue, perhaps in the horn. I stained it with toluidine blue to get a better look at it, so I don't really know what that is about. But it's important to understand how the tooth was sectioned to really interpret the imaging correctly. So the second cut I made was in a mesial distal direction, and then attempted to split this tooth sagittally and get 2 sections of it. So if you can imagine how this tooth was split. So looking at the sagittal sections, we got 2 halves, and when I split it, it appeared there were still some necrotic pulp tissue right in the area where the 2 canals joined. So we're going to definitely want to take a look at that. When the tooth was dried, of course, that pulpal tissue precipitates and condenses. And this is the tooth dried, stained with some toluidine blue, so you can still see some of the tissue. So there was quite a bit of tissue still in the tooth. And those are the sputter-coated areas. Now we're going to look at several areas here. I've labeled these side 1 and side 2 on the website. So this is area 2. So try to correlate the wet specimen with the dried specimen and the sputter-coated specimen. So we're looking in this area where there was a lot of pulpal tissue still present, and it's precipitated down after it's dehydrated. So when you go into this site, go ahead and go to area 2, and you can try to correlate where it is that you're looking in the tooth. And when you look at the scanning images, you can see the precipitated pulpal tissue. It looks like it's just kind of caked on. And it had kind of a fibrous look of pulpal tissue to it, but when you actually go in at a higher power, the picture changes a little bit, and you can see a very, very robust biofilm present pretty much everywhere that you looked. Looks like maybe even some fungal tissue there as well. So if you look at another area further coronally, then you see what looks like a predentin. It's kind of a standard dehydrated predentin look. which you would expect further coronally. But when you go in at higher power on that predentin, it looks like it's been partially demineralized, but again covered, almost caked on a very extensive biofilm on the predentin tissue. Looking at area 5, you go in and correlating where you're actually looking in the specimen. I try to look in areas where there wasn't any tissue, where you had the exposed dentinal wall. And again, when you go into this at high mag, you see kind of demineralized predentin, but impregnated into that predentin is a pretty extensive biofilm with many bacterial morphotypes. And when you go into area 6, I'll only show these because it was pretty much the same everywhere you looked. So whether this was because there was almost 6 months between the time of the treatment and the time of extraction, we don't really know what could happen in the tooth in that time, whether you could have this extensive a bacterial growth. I don't think we know that, or whether this was just never removed to begin with. It's very, very hard to say, but I would spend some time, go through the stitched and the collage images, and refine your pattern recognition, because this is a very good example where you have decalcification, demineralization going on, and also extensive biofilm right in the demineralized tissue. So thank you, JT, for setting it over. Very, very interesting case.